Hello and welcome back again. In the last episode we had a go at making some basic ruins, like those that you can see here on the screen. And in this episode we're going to be taking these paper printouts and use those to add a few extra details to those ruins. However, before we get started, I do just want to quickly say that some of the inspiration for this one came from a video by Art Jeremiah. So if YouTube is working properly, there should be a card for that in the top right hand corner. Anyway, as always, you can find a link for this particular PDF that I put together down in the description, so let's get started. Okay then, the first thing we'll need to do is cut out one of the window frames, and we're going to be gluing that to some thick card. The stuff I'm using here is about 1mm thick. And to do this, I'll just be using a regular glue stick. So there you go. Then we'll do a similar thing with the window sill, but if possible, use some thicker card if you have it. For example, the piece I'm using here is around 2mm thick. And we'll then just cut both of those to size, though we will need 2 of these for each window. Right then, so if I bring in one of the ruins from the last episode, and a bit of PVA glue, all we're going to do is apply some of that glue to the back of the window sill, and stick that on top of the corresponding pattern on the ruin itself, so that it looks something like this. Hopefully you can see that. Next we'll do a similar thing with the window frame itself, and when we've done that, that should result in this kind of thing. Though I don't think it's showing up very well on camera, but we're basically just trying to make the whole thing look a bit more three-dimensional. Anyway, all that's left to do then is the exact same thing on the other side, which is what you can see me doing here. And there you go, that's the other side done. So again, I hope you can see what I've done there. Though, like me, you've probably made some of these where the window itself is broken, like this one here. And if that's the case, it's a simple matter of just cutting this extra window frame to a similar size and shape before gluing it into place, like you can see in this example. And yeah, we can also do the same thing with the doorways as well. Though, of course, you don't really need to add any of these extra pieces if you don't want to, but I think it's nice to have the option. Plus, I kinda like them this way. Anyway, since I just mentioned the doorway, I've also included a door in this PDF. And to make it, we'll simply need to glue one side of the texture to some thicker card. I'm using that thicker 2mm card again. And when that's dry, we'll cut it to shape. Then we'll cut out the other side exactly to size, and simply glue that to the back of the first piece, just using the trusty glue stick. So there you go, something like that. Next we'll take the base texture, and in this example I've glued it to some more of that 1mm card that I have. And then we can cut that out as well. Then it's just a matter of gluing the door on top. And for this, you could use whatever glue you like, but I like to use a bit of super glue as it dries quicker than PVA and it's a lot less messy than hot glue. And there you have it. This is how it should end up. And with any luck, that should fit inside one of our doorways. You know, if you need something like that. But as you can see, it does look a bit silly in a ruin this small, but again, I've included it as it's always nice to have more options. For example, it might be useful if you're building a large ruined keep, or, you know, something like that. Okay then, so another thing I wanted to add was some ruins with multiple levels. And while you can already kind of do that with the previous set, just by gluing multiple layers to some foam core and then cutting them out, I also wanted to do something that wasn't quite so flat, something that was a bit more interesting to look at. So the first thing I've done is I've made the bottom level of the ruins as normal, but as you can see, I've only made the very ends all broken and, well, ruinous. I've left at least half of each wall section at its full height. Then I've gone ahead and made the second level so that is completely ruined, and it's also the right size to fit on top of the first piece that I've made. So even though I'll not be gluing them together like this, I'll just quickly tilt them towards the camera so that you can see the kind of thing that I mean. So something like that. Okay, next we'll need to cut out a little square of foam core. The piece I'm using is around 3/4 of an inch square, and we'll also cut out a piece of the plain stone pattern that's big enough to wrap around it. And all we're going to do then is apply some glue to the paper, stick the foam core piece in the middle, cut away the corners so that we're left with 4 kind of flaps, I suppose, and then fold those flaps around the edges, so that when we're done, we're left with this kind of thing. It's the sort of thing you've seen me do lots of times before. Then we can take our bottom level, apply some PVA glue to the top of the corner post, and stick this little square on top, doing our best to get it centralised. Basically, we're aiming for something like this, though if you're feeling confident you could use hot glue if you think you can get it aligned before the glue dries. I wasn't, so I went with PVA, and because of that I now need to put it to one side to dry. Okay then, next we'll cut a strip of the same foam core that's around a 1/2 inch wide, and we're going to be wrapping that in some of this texture. So that's what you can see me doing here. There's nothing really special about this part. And that should result in something like this. Now, the first thing we're going to do with this piece is cut one end to size. So there you go. And then we can bring in the bottom level of the ruin and see how much of this piece we're going to need in order to cover that kind of intact section of the wall, if that makes sense. So in my example, it's the darker stone roughly in the middle of the strip, which, as you can see, I'll cut at a couple of different angles to make it look like a broken stone, just like we did with the top edge of the ruins. And here I am being a bit paranoid and just checking to make sure I've not cut it too short. Anyway, next we'll take some of that kind of edging rubble texture from the previous PDF and cut out a strip that's the same thickness as the foam core and scrunch that up several times to make it nice and malleable. Then we can glue this over the exposed foam core on the broken end, just using the glue stick again, and then cut away any of the excess, which should result in this kind of thing that you can see here. And when that's done, we can bring the ruins back in and apply some glue to the top of the wall. And as you can see, I'm using PVA again, but you could use hot glue if you prefer. And we'll then stick this small strip on top and do our best to get it centralised so that it kind of overhangs each side by an equal amount, so that we eventually end up with this kind of thing that you can see here. And it's also been butted up against the square piece that we added earlier. Anyway, next we'll need to make a similar piece for the other side, and we'll then glue that into place as well, just like we did with the first piece. And if, like me, you're using PVA glue, we'll then need to give that a few minutes to dry. Okay, so here it is now that it has dried, and all the exposed foam core has now been covered. So next we'll need to make another ruined corner section, just like we did in the last episode, and we'll also need to make sure that it's the right size to fit on top of this little shelf thing. I'm just using the one that I showed earlier in the video. And then it's just a matter of applying some glue to the bottom of this piece, and as I've already said, if you're confident you can get this in the right position on your first try, you might like to use hot glue for this, but again, I'm not, so I'm using PVA. But yeah, once we've applied the glue, we'll stick that on top of the main ruin and do our best to make sure that everything lines up nicely. And once that's dry, that should result in something like this, which I think looks a bit better than if we just had the two wall sections stacked on top of one another. You know, without this course of bricks separating the two levels. Plus, now that I've turned it around, you can see this little ledge on the inside. That's going to give us something to glue a floor to. And if you hadn't already guessed, that's what we're going to have a go at making next. So, to make a ruined floor, we'll first glue the wood texture to some thick card again, and we're then going to cut two of the edges to size, so that we have a nice right angle. There you go. Next we'll bring in the ruins, and apologies for you not being able to see this part, but all I'm really doing here is marking out a little square in the very corner, just to allow for the corner post. And then we can cut that out just using a sharp knife. So there you go, this is the kind of thing that we're aiming for. And if I bring the ruins back in, you can now, hopefully, see how this little cutout, that just goes around the corner post. Then it's just a matter of making all of these wooden planks look a bit more damaged, just by cutting them to different lengths, at different angles, maybe adding a few notches here and there, you know, just to make them look like splintered wood. So that's all I'm really doing here. And here's a quick close-up of the kind of thing I'm going for. However, it will take a couple of minutes to do the entire thing, so here's one I've made earlier, just to speed up the filming process. Anyway, on the same page as the wooden planks, there's also a plain wood texture at the bottom, and we're going to use this to make a long wooden beam, like this one here, just by gluing it to some card and cutting it into a strip that's roughly 1/4 of an inch wide. Though, as you can see in this example, I've also cut a couple of notches into the one end just to make it look like that's where it's broken in half. And we can then add this to the bottom of our floor texture just to make it look a bit more realistic. So, as you can see, I like to try it in a few areas first, just to see where it looks best, and I'll then cut it to size. Next, I'll roughly mark out where it needs to go on the back of the floor piece, so that I can then add some glue to those areas. And again, I'm just using PVA for this. And once that's done, it's then just a matter of gluing the beam into place. And I do like to try and position it so that it's kind of in line with some of the nails of the floor texture, if that makes sense. And there you go, this is how it should look. So, something like that. And all that's left to do then is apply some more glue to the two edges that we're going to be sticking to that inner lip of the inside of the ruins, and glue that into place. And if you like, you can also place a few things on top to ensure that it's lying nice and flat while the glue dries. And with any luck, here's how it should look when it's dry. And I think it looks pretty effective. However, because we're probably going to be placing models on top of this, I am going to reinforce it a little bit, just by running a few lines of hot glue along the inside. So, something like you can see here. That should hopefully give it a bit more strength. And yeah, that's the floor finished. Okay then, for the last part of this episode, we're going to be making a few simple buttresses. And for these, we'll first take this texture, and then what I like to do is see how much of it I'm actually going to need. So, in this example, I want it to sit beneath that little lip, so I'm only going to need this much of the texture. And as such, it makes sense to cut away most of the part that I'll not be using. Then we can take some thinner 3mm thick foam core and glue the remaining texture onto that, just using the trusty glue stick again. Then, when that's dry, we can cut both of these pieces to size, and all we're going to be doing with these is gluing them back to back, like you can see me doing here. And that should end up looking something like this. Okay, so on the same page there's also this texture, and from this we're going to cut a strip that's the same width as the combined thickness of our foam core pieces. So, since I've used two pieces that are 3mm thick, my own strip's going to be 6mm wide. Then we'll need to cut out a couple of lengths that are slightly longer than the two front edges of the buttress. That probably doesn't make much sense. Basically, in this example, the part on the left is 3 bricks tall, so I've made sure that I've got more than 3 bricks worth of texture for that, and the part on the right is 2 bricks tall, so I've cut out more than 2 bricks worth of texture for that part as well. Anyway, we'll then apply some glue to the back of those pieces, and the aim here is to try and line up the pattern on the little strip with the pattern on the sides of the foam core, so that it looks like one continuous brick. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing with the bottom half as well. And we should end up with this kind of thing. Right then, next we'll take this texture, and we'll glue that to some more card, and from that we'll cut out a couple of pieces that are a bit wider than our foam core piece. So in this example, I've gone with 8mm wide. Then we can add some glue to the sloping sides of the foam core, and glue these pieces into place. Though it is worth noting that the darker edge of these little strips, that faces towards the bottom. So here's the second one going on now, and here's how it looks when it's finished. There's our finished buttress. And just to speed things up a bit, here's a couple more that I made earlier, including one that's been broken off along the top. Anyway, next we'll just need to stick those to the side of the ruin. And I like to get a rough idea of their position first, and once I'm happy with that, that's when I'll start gluing them into place. There's not really much more to say about this part really, other than you just need to make sure that they're stuck on straight and they're flush with the bottom of the wall. And when that's done, we should be left with this kind of thing. Now we have buttresses on the plain side of the ruin, which just makes it look a little less plain. But yeah, this piece, it was a bit too big to show in my somewhat limited filming area, so here's a better look at it alongside some of the other ruins that I've been making, and I am quite happy with how it's turned out. I think it should work quite nicely. So all that's left to say is thanks for watching. As always, I'll be interested to see what you think of these down in the comments, and if you do ever have a go at making any of this stuff yourself, then feel free to post pictures over on the Discord or the Facebook group, as it's always good to see some of these bits and pieces being put to use. But yeah, thanks again, and I'll hopefully see you in the next episode. Bye for now.